guys, it's good to see you. Happy Sunday. I'm excited for today. I hope that you've had a great week, and I hope that you've continued to find these videos encouraging or helpful as we walk through the gospel stories. I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of things that I think are fun to point out. So today we are in chapter 21 of our book, and if you can see here, that is pretty significant, right? Like, we've gotten pretty far. We only got this stuff left to do. So anyway, I think we should be proud of us. So chapter 21 is talking about trouble in Jerusalem. So this week we're exploring the book of John, mainly. If you remember, a lot of our gospels are pulled from multiple gospels. Some stories are pulled from just one. This is a story that we're pulling from John, chapters 7 through 9. So John is an interesting book. It's kind of thought of as the spiritual gospel throughout church history. I love some of the stories in John. I think they really are important, and they show Jesus' character, and I think that's really important. So we're going to explore John today. If you want to take the time to read the chunks of scripture that we are going to be talking about today, then here it is. So the main theme of today is that the Messiah is opposed by religious leaders. Remember, our theme overall right now is talking about how Jesus is the Messiah. The Messiah has been waited for from all of the Old Testament. The Old Testament talked about the Messiah, and people have been anticipating the Messiah for a really long time up to this point. And they didn't exactly know what they were looking for. They thought the Messiah would be a political leader, or a strong warrior that would overthrow the Roman government. But Jesus wasn't necessarily any of those things. So today we're talking about how the Messiah was opposed by religious leaders. He wasn't exactly what they were expecting. The prophecy fulfilled comes from Isaiah 55:1. Jesus says in our passage in John 7:37, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me." And the prophet Isaiah offers the same invitation from the Lord. "Come, all you who are thirsty. Come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat." So we see some things that Jesus is pulling out that are really similar to the Old Testament passages. So I'm going to invite you to join me as I read our story for today. I will pause every once in a while to point out a couple of helpful things. These couple of stories in particular have a couple of things I want to point out, just for context. Trouble in Jerusalem. Everyone had an opinion about who Jesus was. Was he a good man or a pretender who tried to fool others? The religious leaders thought he was demon possessed. They hated him and wanted to kill him. Because Judea was so dangerous for him, Jesus purposely stayed in Galilee a little longer than he usually would have. So on the comment, it says the religious leaders thought he was demon possessed. And it says that people were debating about whether he was a good man or someone who's trying to fool others. So Jesus' claims of divinity, that he was God, along with his miracles, made it difficult for people to have a neutral reaction to him. People had very strong opinions about Jesus. He healed a lot of people, so a lot of people thought a lot of people saw that he was from God. And other people thought he was just someone who was trying to fool others. So people had varying reactions. And so in these varying reactions kind of made it difficult for people to to discern who Jesus was. Even his disciples a lot had a hard time figuring out who Jesus was. I'm going to move on for now to our second paragraph. It was autumn in the Feast of Tabernacles, when the Jews made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate the harvest and remember God's good provision for them in the wilderness after their escape from Egypt many centuries earlier. "Come with us to the feast," said Jesus' brothers. "If you want people to know about you, you can't hide here secretly. You must show your miracles to the world." Actually, his brothers were mocking him because they didn't believe he was the Messiah. So, the Feast of Tabernacles was an important holiday, and it's something that's mentioned in the Old Testament. So oftentimes when we're reading in the New Testament, we read the Feast of Tabernacles, and I don't know about you, but I'm like, what in the world is that? So, a little bit about the Feast of Tabernacles, y'all. The Feast of Tabernacles is also known as the Feast of Booths, and it's described in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verses 13 through 17-ish. So, if you're looking on more information about the Feast of Booths, then you can look no further than the Old Testament, and it talks about it. So for this holiday, large groups of people journeyed to Jerusalem from the outskirts of Jerusalem to celebrate this feast. So it was a feast of a huge celebration. There were a lot of people there who were celebrating each other's company and having a good time. And B, during the Feast of Tabernacles, the people offered more sacrifices than at any other time in the annual celebrations. So this was a big deal for a lot of people. It was celebrating the harvest. So people had a lot of fun with this. It was really important to them. "If you want people to know about you, you can hide here secretly. You can't hide here secretly, You must show your miracles to the world." Actually, his brothers were mocking him because they didn't believe he was actually the Messiah. "The right time for me hasn't come," Jesus replied, and his brothers left for Jerusalem without him. A couple days later, Jesus left for the feast secretly with his disciples. In Jerusalem, rumors were buzzing. Trying to spot Jesus in the crowds, the religious leaders grumbled, "Where is that man?" While the crowds whispered, "He's a good man," or they whispered, "He's a deceiver." No one knew what to think of this puzzling man, but neither did anyone speak out publicly because everyone feared the religious leaders. Halfway through the feast, Jesus appeared at the temple courts and boldly began to teach the people. The religious leaders were baffled by his in-depth knowledge of scriptures, saying, "How does he know these things?" Jesus explained, "My teaching comes from God. Anyone who chooses to do God's will knows that I don't speak on my own." The Pharisees tried to seize Jesus, but nothing happened because it wasn't yet God's time. On the last day of the feast, after the priests had poured water on the altar, and all the people had sung praises from the prophecy of Isaiah, Jesus shouted out, "If you're thirsty, come to me. To all who believe in me, streams of living water will flow from him." Jesus was inviting all of the spiritually needy people to come and believe, because he is the only answer to mankind's emptiness. The Jewish ceremonial rituals were solemn and meaningful, but were designated to point people to Jesus. And now he was here, standing in their midst, and everyone was missing his gospel message. After the ceremony, the temple guards went to the chief priests empty-handed. When asked why they hadn't captured Jesus, they replied, "No one ever spoke the way he does." The Pharisees scoffed at them, but Nicodemus, the Pharisee who had visited Jesus at night, asked a question. Does our law condemn a man without first listening to him? The root of faith was growing in him, and it gave him courage to speak out. The next day, the Pharisees grabbed a sinful woman and shoved her in front of Jesus. Our law says that she should die, they sneered. What do you say? These Pharisees didn't care about righteousness or justice. Their intent was to humiliate this woman and trap Jesus so they could accuse him of not respecting the law of Moses. I want to stop there real quick. So stoning was a very old punishment at this point for specific sins. We see punishment for adultery in Leviticus 20:10. But the thing is that in this moment, the Pharisees weren't necessarily interested in the actual sin of this woman. They were interested in trapping Jesus. So the Mosaic law included the death penalty for adultery, and but the thing is that at this point, the Jews didn't really enforce it. They weren't actually going to stone people at this point. Only because they were living under the Roman government, only the Roman government had the authority to declare death on a person. So only the Roman government could give the death penalty. So when they were presenting Jesus with this, they were pressing Jesus to enforce the Old Testament law that they probably wouldn't have enforced, but he would have ended up getting in trouble with the Roman government if he had done so. So it was kind of a double bind they were trying to put him in. So that made it a little precarious. They were trying to, either way, it would have been a lose-lose situation for Jesus. And that's kind of what they were intending to do. Jesus wasn't fooled by the hypocritical Pharisees. He knew their hearts. Jesus bent down, and without saying anything, he wrote in the dirt with his finger, while the Pharisees continued to ask their angry questions. Then Jesus stood up. Looking straight into the Pharisees' eyes, he said, "Whoever among you is without sin, let him throw the first stone at this woman." Once again, he stooped down and wrote in the dirt. Unsettled by Jesus' words, the accused Pharisees left one at a time, beginning with the oldest, until no one was left but Jesus and the accursed woman. "Where are your accusers?" Jesus asked her. Obviously, she now had no accusers. Jesus continued, "Neither do I accuse you. Go now and leave your life of sin." The woman left, forgiven, but warned of the danger of future sin. Later, as they were walking along, Jesus and his disciples saw a blind man. "Who sinned that he was born blind?" his disciples asked. "No one," Jesus replied. "This blindness happened so that people would see the work of God in this man's life. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." So in this moment, the disciples were falling into a pit that was pretty common, and sometimes still is. So in this time, it was pretty common for people to believe that if you were sick or blind or had variations of disabilities, that it was because that you had done something terrible and you were being punished for it. So in this moment, Jesus is affirming that that's not true at all. Jesus is telling his disciples in this moment that oftentimes these disabilities don't have anything to do with how good or bad the people are, but instead, we live in a sinful world, and sometimes things happen just because the world isn't what it was meant to be. And also, sometimes these disabilities aren't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes God is using them to be glorified. So basically in this moment, Jesus is taking something that was really misunderstood at this time and being like, "Hey, you're not actually getting the whole picture here. Don't judge this person because they have a disability. It doesn't mean that they're sinful. It doesn't mean that they're anything less than anyone else. So Jesus was using this moment as a teaching moment for his disciples. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world, Jesus said. Jesus had a strange cure for the man's blindness. He spat on the ground, put mud on the man's eyes, and sent him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The word Siloam means sent. The man obeyed Jesus' instructions and went home seeing. There were 3 different reactions to the man's healing. First, the Pharisees were furious. They interrogated the man, asking him, "How did this happen?" Then they made wild accusations against Jesus, saying he is not from God because he broke the Sabbath. Finally, they accused the man of lying. Second, the man's parents were afraid that the Pharisees would throw them out of the synagogue, so they refused to acknowledge that Jesus was the Christ and had healed their son. "Ask him," they said. "He's a grown man." Third, the blind man had faith that grew stronger as the Pharisees became more hostile. First, when his neighbors and the people of the town asked him how he had been healed, the man simply called Jesus by name. "The man they called Jesus," he said. After the Pharisees' intense questioning, the man said, "He's a prophet. And whether he's a sinner, I don't know. But this I know. Once I was blind, but now I see." If this man weren't from God, he could do nothing. The man's words further infuriated the Pharisees, and they excommunicated him from the synagogue. They kicked him out. Hearing of the man's plight, Jesus sought him out, and when he found him, he asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Uncertain of who this Son of Man was, the man asked, "Who is he that I might believe in him?" When the man realized that Jesus, the man who had healed him, was indeed the Christ, the Son of Man, and was right there talking with him, he exclaimed, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped Jesus. "I came into the world so that the blind may see, and those who see may become blind," Jesus said. Some Pharisees asked, "Are we blind too?" Once again, the Pharisees didn't see the blindness in their darkened hearts. So it's interesting in this whole couple of pages that we've just read, because people had different reactions to Jesus in this passage. So you have many reactions. Jesus' brothers mocked Jesus, right? They said, "Go to Judea and do your miracles so you can show the world who you are." Jesus' brothers didn't quite believe in him. And the crowds were confused as to Jesus' identity. They didn't know if he was a good man or he was a fraud. They didn't know if he deceived people. You had the religious leaders who questioned Jesus' credentials. How did this man get so smart without any training? And they were confused. The temple guards were amazed at Jesus' words. The temple guards told the Pharisees, "No one ever spoke the way that he does, so we didn't arrest him." Nicodemus defended Jesus' innocence. Nicodemus was the one Pharisee who said to his fellow Pharisees, "Does our law condemn a man without first hearing what he has to say?" The religious leaders denied Jesus' divinity completely. This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath, as our laws say. And then we have the blind man at the end of our story time. And the blind man believed in Jesus, saying, "I know that I was blind, and now I see. Lord, I believe." So if you're exploring some of these stories, it's kind of interesting to know the varying reactions that Jesus had. He wasn't accepted everywhere he went, though he did really good things. Sometimes he was defended, sometimes he was accepted. He was mocked by his brothers. So, in this passage, I want you and myself to consider, how do I respond when people question or ridicule my faith? We see in our passage today that there are many ways people reacted to Jesus. And I don't think that that's not true now. I think people still have a lot of ways that we react to Jesus. And I also think that when my faith is ridiculed or questioned, there are a lot of ways that I have a choice to respond. I can either be afraid and deny that I'm a Christian at all. And that can be a temptation sometimes, depending on who it is or what's being asked. I can become intimidated and decide not to talk about it altogether. There have been a lot of times where I have a lot of coworkers who were atheists. And sometimes it was really difficult to talk about questions of faith because they just didn't believe it at all. And in those times, it can be easy to become intimidated and just decide to drop the subject. Like, I just don't want to talk about it at all. That you can also listen to what they have to say and then eventually start to doubt it yourself. Or you can take the road of the blind man in this story. And it's funny if you pay attention, because if you pay attention, you realize that the more that the blind man was pressed by the Pharisees, the more he dug into his faith and was like, but his name was Jesus. But I think he was a prophet. And finally, he told the Pharisees, all I know is that once I was blind, but now I see. And only someone before God can do that. And for his faith, he was cast out of his church, or the synagogue. And that's, his parents didn't even acknowledge Jesus because they were afraid of that. So there are different reactions that we are capable of having. And I have noticed in my own life that when I've been open and able to talk about my faith, then it's been really good. I know a lot of my coworkers who were atheists and agnostics. We would have conversations about Christianity all the time. And it ended up being really good, because they knew that I was someone that wasn't going to judge them harshly. And I wasn't going to be mean to them or critique them. There was a trust built. And so they could ask me their questions and we could talk about it. And there was something really good about that. So I hope that you consider this question as how do you respond when people question or ridicule your faith? I know that's something that I have had to work on a lot over the last, I'm 28. So over the last significant portion of my life, I have had to work on this. So I will leave you that as something to think about. I hope that, like the blind man, you can ask the Lord for courage and speak boldly about what you believe with grace. We serve such a good God, and I don't have regrets in my faith. And these stories encourage me. So I hope that you can feel encouraged. If you have any comments or questions, as always, feel free to email me. My email is mcinnis, MCINNIS, @spu.edu. I would love to hear from you. If you have a response to that question, how do you respond when people question or ridicule your faith, then feel free to email it to me, and I will get back to you and we can chat about it. I love to hear from y'all. I hope you have a fantastic Sunday. It's great to chat with you all. and I look forward to seeing you whenever that is possible. Stay healthy, and I hope that you have managed to find ways to stay happy. Y'all are in my prayers. Have a good night, y'all.